All right, welcome, you sexy bitch, to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Reavers. With me is Phil McKenzie, and we are talking to you today about UFC 236. We enjoyed our long-awaited weekend off, filled some of that time that the UFC normally would have been occupying with horrifically gruesome brawl between Artem Lobov and Jason Knight, and oh, Phil, I don't know if you knew, but I did a ONE FC bonus episode this week as well, because that did happen on our weekend off, and we were in trouble for not covering that.
We are shills for the UFC.
We are shills. I just want everyone to know. The only reason I did that bonus episode is because the last check from Dana White didn't clear. So I'm like, well, like if I'm not getting paid to only talk about the UFC, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Dana has shown himself to be a man who is amenable to negotiation and people playing hardball with him.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's going to work. We're not going to get shut down any day now.
Great. You will definitely be hearing this episode, and it is not the last episode. So, UFC 236. Phil, you and I think, have had a similar journey towards this card. I think we're finally reaching a point where we see the two names, Holloway and Poirier, next to each other with that little number 2 at the end. And we finally have been sucked into the gravity of this matchup. Like, all right, this is a really good fight between two really good and consistently really exciting fighters. But it's taken me a little while to get here. And I kind of have a hard time saying why that is, but it's a weird matchup from a promotional perspective. It doesn't seem to have the gravity even of a Holloway-Ortega or of a Poirier-Gaethje, and yet it is by far, technically and stylistically, like a more elite matchup.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that these guys were both two men who fought their way to relevance when they were kind of written off. Because, before Jose Aldo fought Max Holloway the first time, I wrote an article, I think it was Max Holloway in 5 fights, where I looked back at his career over several points, and one of the things was that Max Holloway at one point was basically considered to be an action fighter that they would feed to up-and-coming prospects. Mm-hmm. Like, they tried to make, and this was when Mirsad Bektic was considered to be, this super grade A elite talent, right? They tried to make Mirsad Bektic Max Holloway on multiple occasions. Every time there would be someone from a hot gym or some hyped up new prospect, they would try throwing him at Max Holloway. Mm-hmm. Because Max Holloway was seen, I think, I might be wrong, but from a promotional perspective, it looks like they saw Max Holloway as a fun, limited banger. And it was just the fact that he started putting away more and more of these guys that kind of made that shift. And
it's kind of funny to think that at the time they fought, the promotion was probably thinking, we're going to set Andre Feely, our new Team Alpha Male guy, up for success by giving him win over Max Holloway.
Yeah, I'm convinced Feely was the favorite in that fight. I think Justin Lawrence was the favorite over him. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it wasn't just the actual fights that he had, but it was the bookings that they tried to make. I mean, Bektic Holloway was a clear example of the UFC kind of sacrificing prospects against one another. But also, Conor McGregor being the classic example. Mm-hmm. And Poirier, so Holloway sort of had some trip-ups early in his career because he joined the UFC so insanely early when he was 19, I think.
Dustin Poirier.
Was he 20?
His 5th fight and first UFC fight was against Dustin Poirier, who was a good enough prospect that he had a whole documentary made about him. Yep. And that was Dustin Poirier's 13th fight.
Yep. So Holloway had some hiccups in his early career, but since then had just sort of, he built his confidence from scratch in the UFC. Mm-hmm. And Poirier himself, like you said, he had a documentary made about him. He was, unlike Holloway, he was sort of destined for greatness in a way, but then was pushed back enough times that everyone kind of gave up on him being more than a fun action fighter.
Even up to, I think, right up until that Michael Johnson fight, like after the lightweight move, there was still sort of the feeling of like, well, this is just what happens to Dustin Poirier sometimes, Like he's clearly getting better, but the power punchers are just going to blow him out of the water. And to see where Dustin Poirier came from as a fighter, to see how he struggled, like what specific struggles he had back when he was fighting Korean Zombie, and then to see that in the last two fights against Gaethje and Alvarez. Like, that's the thing. It's what should make this matchup so fascinating, is that Dustin Poirier is one of only two, if unlike the judges that night, you were watching his fight with Dennis Bermudez, but one of only three men to have officially beaten Max Holloway. And Holloway has gotten so much better since then, but so has Dustin Poirier. Like, that should be one of the most compelling things in this fight. And yet, it's an interim title fight in a division where the champion is currently inactive. Surprise, surprise. That seems to be the defining characteristic of this UFC era. And where I don't know. It just feels like the UFC has successfully turned in my opinion, their number one pound for pound fighter into a bargaining chip in this matchup. And I'm like, that sucks. Max Holloway deserves to I don't know. I don't know what Max Holloway deserves, but he deserves better than whatever this feeling I'm having is.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that the both of these guys are probably incredibly jazzed at the chance to fight for a fake belt, but it is kind of fake.
Yeah.
And it feels like they got there in both cases, they got to this place by taking the fights that no one else would.
Yeah.
Right? And that Holloway would fight anyone. He would fight on short notice. He would step in as late replacements. Was he a replacement against Conor McGregor? I think he might have been.
Maybe. He's done it a few. I mean, he was even just not like last year. He was going to step in short notice to fight Khabib.
Yeah, he would fight anyone. Poirier, basically was winning against Alvarez before he got fouled, and then Alvarez basically overtook him by beating Gaethje, and he had to then beat both Gaethje and Alvarez to get back to where he should have been in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of stuff. These guys have taken the fights that no one else would in a division where it's very, very hard to get divisions where it's very, very hard to get anywhere because of the center of gravity of things like Conor McGregor. And their reward at the end of it is going to be just like one of them taking the other one out.
Yep. It just has a particularly dog-eat-dog feel, and goddamn it, these two are my favorite dogs, I just feel like they both deserve better than this, even though it is, again, the closer it gets, I can't help but be excited for this matchup, because it's fucking Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway, too. That's an incredible fight, but...
I mean, like you said, I would co-sign on this. Max Holloway is... probably, for my money, the best fighter in MMA right now. And Dustin Poirier is the current violence weight belt holder. Undisputed, unchallenged.
Thank God he took it before Timofey Nastyukhin got his hands on it. But yeah, it's So okay, let's talk about the matchup itself, because again, there's all this weird thing affecting our ability to generate hype for it. But I have to underscore, it's a really good matchup. Even the first time, for as brief as it was a fun fight. And Max Holloway, I don't know. These are two guaranteed action fighters, but also I think both really underrated technicians and savvy thinking fighters in the cage. What would you view as, I have had some difficulty with this, what would you view as the basic parameters of this matchup? Because going through these guys' resumes, trying to find comparable opponents, there aren't many. These aren't fighters that have a lot of parallels in the sport. They really stand out. Holloway has not fought many people who possess Poirier's combination of skill and crushing power. plus the offensive wrestling threat that he often uses to mix things up. Poirier has not fought many strikers who can throw the kind of volume or have the kind of build that Max Holloway has, and certainly none of them as skilled as Max Holloway. So it's tough to find parallels and get a really concrete idea of how these guys, what a fight between these two will look like. Like, I'm expecting a lot of what feels like fairly even striking exchanges.
Yeah, in terms of like physical frame, and if you really want to go there, there's Yancy Medeiros, but there's no comparing Yancy Medeiros to Max Holloway. So yeah, I mean, I tend to agree there isn't really much in either of these guys' resume. You know, even in many ways, including each other, because they've transformed so much in the time since their first fight. I mean, you just look at that first fight and you're just like, God damn, you guys are young.
Mm-hmm. When did that take place? That was in 2012. It was now fully 7 years ago.
Yeah, Poirier still looked super weird. Holloway just looks like a angry teenager.
Yeah, it's the hair for Poirier. I mean, the hair he's rocking now was a very good choice. He went from creepy dude in alley to handsome guy at bar very, very quickly by growing just a little bit of hair.
Yep. So I think the basic thing is that it's not really going to be dictated by any of the styles that we've seen anyone come up against, in part because these guys haven't really fought anyone like the other guy, and also because I think Ortega's probably the closest thing for Holloway. I don't think Poirier has really fought anyone like Max. Mm-hmm. Since he fought him. So I think the question just comes down to, what kind of match are we looking at here? And I think we're essentially looking at an awesome pocket boxing exchange. Mm-hmm. That seems to be what Poirier has developed from being just kind of a go anywhere banger to being a power puncher in his early UFC tenure, and has since kind of leavened that out with much better defense in the pocket, much more calm under fire, and just that useful ability to take steam off his punches in just to become a much more effective boxer in the pocket. So I think it's just generally what we're looking at again. We're just looking at another high pace, in close action fight, which should be unless someone gets finished, if someone doesn't get finished early, like guaranteed to be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, pretty much. Even exchanges. I mean, the thing is the dynamic of this matchup, just trying to wrap my head around it. Because it's not a matchup where either guy seems like he should be vastly favored if he gets to press forward. Both guys, especially now, like both Poirier and Holloway, seem pretty damn comfortable adjusting and moving in whatever direction they need to maintain their preferred distance. It's not like Holloway's going to have the same sort of volume advantage he has over most fighters. Like, Poirier's been in some wild fights, and especially that ability as a power puncher to not only have a lot more power than Max, but to be able to throw away shots and take steam off of them to preserve himself, like that is going to be crucial as well. I guess Poirier is going to be more demanding of Holloway's defense than anyone other than perhaps, I don't know, Jose Aldo. But, goddamn, I just think it is going to be very exciting and potentially very nip-tuck. Like, Holloway for me is the pound-for-pound best guy in the world. I firmly believe that, but a lot of parity between people around this weight, and like it's not like there's a slim chance that Dustin Poirier could beat him. It does feel like a really closely contested matchup to me. Are there any things that strike you as like Max Holloway's key advantages or Dustin Poirier's key advantages?
So Poirier I think it's very hard to get to Max in the clinch. He's very good at framing out and fighting hands, but I think Poirier is a more effective offensive fighter in the clinch should he get there. Similarly, on the ground, he's obviously, as he showed in the first fight, he's always been a more willing wrestler and kind of more diverse submission and top game threat. Holloway does occasionally tend to kind of leave his neck exposed as he scrambles out, and there's always that DAS from Poirier. I think Holloway's major advantage, and it's probably going to be the one which has me picking him, is just his durability. Poirier has been hurt before. I think his chin has improved a lot up at lightweight, but we've still seen him get flatlined by Michael Johnson.
Yeah.
And Holloway just has one of the best chins we've ever seen. We've never seen him badly hurt by any strike, including clean, full shots from Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's been concerned by them, but you couldn't have ever said we've seen him staggered.
No. Yeah, put on the defensive, Yeah, concerned is a good way to put it. But concerned is a lot more measured than a lot of people's responses to being hit by the likes of McGregor and Aldo. I don't know. I do still wonder how fragile Dustin Poirier really is. What is his actual physical hard line compared to Holloway's? Because I think a lot of his evolution, like Poirier's tension and nervous energy used to be like a main thing holding him back. He was a guy who knew he could hit hard, who had a pretty diverse skill set, and who would basically try to slug it out with everyone. Even early in his career, his style of slugging was pretty different, but still, he would get into wars with anyone who wanted one. And was always, I think that the main difference I see now between supposedly durable Poirier, who can survive shots from Gaethje and Alvarez without issue, and the one who got knocked out even up to Michael Johnson, but before that, the one who was getting hurt by Eric Koch, the one who got knocked up by Conor McGregor, the one who got buzzed by Cub Swanson and knocked down a couple times by Korean Zombie, is that he now has better eyes. Like he's calmed down enough that he can stay aware of what's coming at him, so things just don't catch him by surprise very often anymore. And that is one of Max Holloway's main things, is even when he is getting hit, it's very, very difficult to catch him by surprise with something he hasn't seen coming long before it actually hits his chin. But that being said, I do think Max, in addition to being probably still more durable, is also a better defensive fighter and probably a more layered and nuanced adapter in fights. We have seen, like, rewatching Holloway's fight with Brian Ortega is awesome. It's an incredible fight, but rewatching him starting to have some issues when Ortega really puts all the energy he has left into his rally in the third round, and watching Holloway run into that difficulty but be totally unperturbed and by the end of the round have completely solved the shots that Ortega was starting to find on him, to the point that in the fourth round, like, Ortega's going for the exact same shit and getting punished while he's like moving into position to try the same counters that were working at the beginning of the third. That Holloway can adapt and start to preempt things that quickly. I did watch Dustin Poirier's fight with, what's guy who beat Conor McGregor? Why am I blanking on his name? Joe Duffy.
Joe Duffy.
Yeah, and I do think Poirier is still very, very open, especially with a guy with long arms, to 1-2s down the center. Just being hit with straight shots. And the thing with Poirier has learned how to throw away shots, but Max Holloway has never been a super powerful hitter. His whole style is built around throwing punches that are almost ludicrously relaxed. Where he's not putting any steam on them whatsoever, and that is why they hurt. Like, they're very snappy, loose punches that Max Holloway throws. But sometimes they don't even look that fast sometimes, but you still can't see them coming. There's no tell. There's no momentary tensing up in Max Holloway's body before he lets his shots go. He's just constantly eyeing his opponent, seeing the openings, and almost without thinking, taking advantage of them. It's just, he sees the opening, he touches it. It's that simple. I do see that, however, whatever direction this fight is moving, probably Max Holloway will be able to do something like what he did to Jose Aldo, be able to touch Poirier with the reach, draw out his shots, and still be able to lace quick 1-2s and punches like that down the center. I'm not sure that Poirier has that level of defensive ability to avoid that kind of stuff consistently. And if he does start to avoid it, does he have the ability to avoid it and consistently come back with counters to adapt to it in turn and find an advantage out of that problem?
Yeah, Holloway does not just have pace. His pace is not just exhausting physically, it is exhausting mentally.
Yes.
Because he is constantly thinking very, very, very fast, as well as punching you in the face the whole time.
Yes.
He's constantly changing his offensive angles, his rhythm, his timing. He is attacking in multiple different ways. And yeah, it's just constantly shifting. He is an exhausting person to fight. And yeah, I think what you said about Poirier's defense is really on point. That is definitely, I think, what has really been the difference, because it's very, very easy to see Poirier, any older version of Poirier losing that Gaethje fight.
Yes.
And in some ways, it was just really awesome to see, because he exploited in Gaethje his own old weakness. His tendency to default to the double forearm guard, right? And he didn't do it much himself. He watched Gaethje's shots coming back to himself, and when he used the double forearm, it was generally appropriate, and he used it briefly and then went back to looking for his shots. It was, a far cry from the old Dustin Poirier, who would just chuck up his arms over his head and just back away until the other guy got bored of hitting him.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, you can see him visibly you can see that the tendency to want to panic has not really entirely left him, because I don't think it has. But you can just see him calm himself down. You can see a lot of the time in fights, he'll just have this thing where you can see him just visibly swallow it back down again.
Mm-hmm.
He'll just sort of set himself again and go, yep, no, we're fine, and then get back to it. Happens a whole bunch of times in the Gaethje fight. You can just see this visual settling from him. And another issue with Holloway is that he's not going to allow that at all. I mean, even Gaethje could be backed off, because Gaethje is and knows that he is just not a particularly defensively great fighter, and Poirier was hitting him very, very hard. But Holloway will just never leave you alone.
Right. It's a different kind of pressure. I think about that kind of thing a lot, the mental pressure that comes along with it. You can have mental pressure on someone even if you're not coming forward. If you have another advantage that you're using frequently, like reach or speed or something, there are other ways to keep pressure on someone to make them uncomfortable. And Holloway seems to get that out of everyone he fights. Just sustained discomfort. And I think it's a really interesting contrast to how insanely relaxed he himself is. I can't think of many times where, even in fights with Conor McGregor, where Holloway has looked uncomfortable or seemed to be reacting badly or flinching. Even when Dustin Poirier was breaking his arm in two in their first fight, Holloway was fighting as hard as he could to get out of that submission and continually trying to adjust. He didn't panic until his arm was literally bending the wrong direction by a significant angle. So, but again,
I think that McGregor fight. Sorry.
No. The McGregor fight.
Keep going. So I think that is the first and probably the only time I've ever seen Holloway really uncomfortable. I thought he looked like his pressure was not there. I felt in that fight. I think it's still one of McGregor's most impressive performances. Mm-hmm. Perhaps even in some ways, I think it's basically that it's that and DS2 for me. That he just managed to, and that's, I think that's when Holloway kind of learned to be as confident as he is, because he learned that he couldn't allow other guys to dictate what was going to happen in the fight, because Conor McGregor simply refused to be forced backwards in that fight, and Holloway was just not able to pressure effectively, and he found himself kind of second guessing what Conor was going to do the whole time. I think he learned that, you have to have that. You have to have that complete confidence that what you are going to do is going to work. And in some ways, I think he's sort of learned that lesson better than Conor has now.
I mean, he quickly adopted Conor's, at least Conor's purported fight anyone, anytime, short notice replacement guy thing, That's
but he also kept it up on the belt.
Right. He's now like out McGregor, it feels like, where he's filled the vacancy McGregor left in the featherweight division and exceeded it in his own way.
Yeah. So I think just all that, and also what you mentioned about Poirier having to learn this, I think that's very relevant as well. I think all this stuff about gradating rhythm and timing and power, Poirier had to learn that the hard way. He had to learn that through multiple times of getting forced back by just dynamic, aggressive fighters. And Holloway, I feel like it just comes to him a lot more naturally.
Yeah.
He's just, he's just kind of a genius at that kind of stuff. And whilst Poirier has become, it's very rare that you get someone who's improved as consistently as Dustin Poirier has. Because you would keep expecting him to hit a technical plateau, and he really just hasn't. But in the end, I just feel like he is just not quite as inhumanly talented as Max Holloway is.
Yeah, I mean, talent's in other areas, but it's really the confidence, the composure. I guess, if I had to point to one thing, I would agree. It's the fact that it's this relaxation and adaptability is intrinsic to Max Holloway as a fighter. It's part of who he is, and for Poirier, it is a suit of armor he has slowly built for himself and now wears. But if anyone can find the cracks in that kind of psychological barrier, it's probably Max Holloway, who just is that guy, and seemingly always has been, and has only has been that relaxed and that easygoing in fights basically since the beginning, has only grown more and more confident and aggressive in that over time. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be picking Max Holloway because defaulting to it, but still, I have to reiterate, like, it's not I don't feel like this should be an easy fight to call. Like, Poirier is an exceptionally dangerous fighter, and one who has gotten so much technically better, and we have seen him in very difficult fights going up to 4 rounds, Justin Gaethje fighting at a blistering pace, taking damage, coming back, and intelligently solving the problems in front of him. So, like, I think Poirier
we've also never really I keep interrupting you. I'm very sorry about this.
How dare you? I would never interrupt you, Phil.
No. We've rarely seen, I think you mentioned this earlier on the fight, we've rarely seen Holloway's defense have to deal with subtle, like his own brand of subtle offense. Someone who throws away shots at him. Because Jose Aldo, much as we both dearly love him, does not do that. He doesn't really. Nope. He feints, but he does not throw away shots in the way that Poirier has learned to. So it'll be interesting to see whether Holloway's defense can kind of hold up under that.
Yeah.
And it is also worth pointing out that Poirier is by far the harder one-punch hitter.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, Poirier's got that curious blend, that boxer-puncher thing of real granular tactical skill and crushing physical power. I don't know. It's interesting. It's going to be a fine line, man, but it is truly a fascinating matchup. It sucks that there's some asterisks attached, maybe just for you and I. I suspect that at least some of our listeners will be irate that we dared to question the validity of this matchup, but as a matchup, what's not to like? I mean, let's be real. It's Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. 2. So we're going to talk about the rest of UFC 236 after this break right here. Of course, the co-main event, another interim title fight. This one between Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya. That one feels a little less, fewer asterisks attached to that one. I'm happy to see that. Pretty interested. And then after that is maybe the worst undercard ever attached to a pay-per-view in UFC history. No, that's hyperbolic, but there are a couple of highlights really spread weirdly throughout this very strange undercard. So later on in today's show, we're going to talk about those. I think we decided we want to talk about Jalen Turner versus Matt Frivola. We want to talk about Curtis Millender versus Belal Muhammad. And of course, Ovince St. Preux versus Nikki Thrills, the main card opener. All of that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. The middleweight interim title is being contested. How long has it been since Robert Whittaker fought last, Phil? Do we know off the top of our heads?
It's actually been a while. It was relatively early in 2018, wasn't it? Because that was everyone's 20. Everyone who knew what they were talking about 2018 fight of the year was Bobby Knuckles against Romero too.
It was June of 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although he was scheduled for that fight with Gastelum recently, and then nearly died from staph infection. Why do all the good ones have to have this kind of shit happen to them? Why does it go?
I thought his internal organs was exploding out.
Oh yeah, he had like a hernia, and they're like he would have died if he fought. I'm like, Jesus Christ,
what a pussy.
The new Jose Aldo, Robert Whittaker, just as much a coward as his forebear. Can't even fight through his, lower intestine poking out of his gut. But okay, interim title. Again, I don't have nearly as many complaints about this one as the other one. They're still completely meaningless, more so than ever, these interim belts. But they will almost certainly give Israel Adesanya a shot if he wins this one. Like, at least it will be what interim titles were ostensibly once supposed to be, which is a guaranteed shot at the real champ. So, it's fine. And it's an interesting fight because Israel Adesanya is endlessly compelling. Like, how can you not be interested in how Israel Adesanya is going to face this next challenge? What does Kelvin Gastelum bring to the table, if anything, in your mind, that is different from the guys Izzy has fought up to this point?
Hand speed.
That's a good one.
And durability.
That's a good one.
And he's also he's really good at rear naked choking people.
That's a good one too. It is kind of it though, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because Kelvin Gastelum, folks, he is on a mission for gold. Don't ever deny him that. But as a fighter, the one note feels a little too damning, but he hasn't changed. Really at all.
How about 1-2 notes?
That was a terrible joke.
I know.
It's worse than some of the shit I say on this show. Bravo. Yeah, so, Kelvin Gastelum, he brings, basically the thing is, like, aside from the scrambling and the submission in scrambles ability, all he really brings to the table that's new is physical. Is like, well, he can hit harder and faster than the other guys. Maybe he can't hit harder than Derek Brunson. But he's more durable and tougher and mentally tough, although I kind of have my questions about that too. Like, I've definitely seen Gastelum thrown off his game and looking uncomfortable and unsure. But I think it all really, for Gastelum, comes down to all of his difficulties come down to him just being kind of technically limited to doing the 3 or 4 things that he does. 3 of which are throwing 1-2s.
Yeah. So there was an interesting thing about Gastelum, because I was trying to look at his career and trying to figure out because he's an incredibly consistent guy, but he's lost to an inconsistent collection of opponents, right? They don't have many commonalities which run through them.
What?
I was trying to think, like, what does this mean? What's that?
I was like, you don't see the commonalities between Chris Weidman, Neil Magny, and Tyron Woodley? That doesn't paint a clear picture of the kind of fighter who loses to that kind of guy? You know, that Magny, Weidman type?
Oh, yeah, they're very similar. Like, I mean, you might say it's wrestling, but then he beat, Kennedy and Souza, so...
Right.
And I think the basic thing is, and these are often confused in the UFC, I'm going to be specific here, lateral movement. Like, not footwork, people who walk sideways. Because I would not describe Neil Magny as being someone with great footwork. But something Neil Magny can do is he can walk in a circle. And he does do this quite often. And I honestly think that Kelvin Gastelum actually genuinely struggles quite badly with people who walk in a circle. And we kind of saw this in the Weidman fight. And it kind of comes down to the way that the way that limited skill set is deployed, because it's all off that hopping step in.
Mm-hmm.
That he bounces up and down, and then suddenly he bounces forward, and then he throws a long spearing jab or the 1-2, and you try and attack him at some point, and he'll either lean back and hit you with the 1-2, or he'll meet you halfway. This is sort of basically it. But the problem is with leaping forward and having this long hopping step is that it just kind of misses if the other person just moves in a circle.
Yeah. He doesn't have any technical tools to attack on a diagonal.
Yeah. I mean, he does it occasionally. He will do things like throwing he'll just throw raw body kicks. But he did that against, for example, Bisping, who just clocked him for it, and then he stopped. I mean, it's not exactly, again, it's because he's still going to be hopping into it. It's not subtle.
Yeah.
So,
and we've seen technical growth out of Gastelum. Like, for example, we've seen like head movement. We have seen defensive improvements and things, but it all still ends up feeling weirdly disconnected. Like, it doesn't feel like he's been improving his game or his style of fighting. It just feels like he's just been adding different pieces. It's essentially, it's like his defense is like the equivalent of adding a cool plastic spoiler to your Toyota Camry. Like, for all that it affects the actual performance of the car itself, it might look cool. Occasionally comes in useful, I guess. I mean, I guess a spoiler is even less useful than head movement, but you know what I mean. Like, the core of who Kelvin Gastelum is has not changed, either technically or, and I guess that implies it also has not changed conceptually either. He's the 1-2 guy who leaps in. He's like a much less developed Manny Pacquiao, where like if anytime he runs into that somebody who can like Juan Manuel Marquez, who can just time that hop forward, he's going to run into problems and have to fucking brawl his way out of it.
Yeah, I mean that's the improvement we've seen from Chris Weidman lately, right? Is that Chris Weidman, when he was fighting Jacare, is that Weidman was able to, I mean, not when he was fighting Jacare, when he was, I mean, yeah, we saw it in Jacare, right?
Yeah, that too.
Weidman would just circle out and throw tons of strikes, and Jacare had to track him down. The thing is, Jacare is a natural pressure counterfighter type guy, and so that was a reasonable matchup for Jacare. But in the matchup with Gastelum, Jacare kept trying to pressure, and Gastelum just kind of physically broke him just by being incredibly durable. Because he kept getting into those exchanges that Gastelum wanted. I mean, he won a lot of them, and arguably Jacare won a lot of them, and arguably most of them, but he didn't, like, he just couldn't really physically keep up with Gastelum, who is, as we've mentioned, has an absolutely ridiculous chin, and incredible cardio, despite not looking like he should have the second.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is something that he won the fight that Jacare had with Weidman. You know, like he was able to withstand that kind of onslaught and keep his volume up. And he is confident in his way. Like, he's relaxed. But yeah, a lot of it is just, maybe this is just, he's comfortable being this guy. He just doesn't want to change. But anyway, like, does any of that spell huge problems for Israel Adesanya? Like, there are little potential areas, but I don't know. Like, someone like Adesanya who has reach and excels even without his reach being a factor at distance management, excels positionally, like Adesanya does lots of big crazy moves, but really like the unglamorous backbone of his style is like his small, subtle footwork. And I don't see Kelvin Gastelum getting around that. Like, he could absolutely knock Izzy out, I guess, in an exchange. It's not like Adesanya doesn't get hit, but, he just seems like a pretty straightforward puzzle. And I've seen Adesanya already solve what feel like more challenging puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, so... Yeah, if Gastelum can't track people who just walk around in a circle, how will he do against someone with actually good footwork?
Right.
That's not really a question that we've necessarily seen. In some ways, it might put Adesanya into a bit more risk than he might otherwise have. Like you said, Gastelum has improved in his very specific areas. His ability to kind of lean back and hit counters in the pocket is definitely something he didn't used to have. He's gained a slightly bigger variety of kind of the ways he throws 1-2s and
changing the timing on the 2 or 3 punches he throws.
Yes. And Adesanya and his main problem is always going to be that he's just doesn't seem to be a particularly big hitter. It's only like he's had to get attrition KOs, even aside from the Brunson thing where Brunson ran into his knee.
Yeah.
He couldn't knock out a rather faded Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
So he will be in there for a long time, but as it stands, like, I just don't think he's gonna react particularly when Gastelum tries to fake him out by jumping at him. He'll just back a little bit out of range and then maybe jab him and then move back out again. I think the main thing is, like, does he pour it on enough to finish Gastelum? Does Gastelum just start getting frustrated and walking into shots? Because I suspect that Gastelum will do that. He is, as you said, very confident, and he thinks that he is a good. He probably thinks that he is a good striker.
Withering remarks from Baron Phil McKenzie. He does think that he's a good striker. It's just a particularly scathing way to put that.
I don't know. You sometimes I've said this before, haven't I, about Josh Emmett? Like, there's certain guys where you just look at them and you're just like, you clearly think this is like really, this is great stuff here.
Yeah.
But it's hard to hit Adesanya. He's he's not gonna make big mistakes when he opens up, and it's been so easy to solve Gastelum defensively that I just feel like he can keep that with Gastelum for 5 rounds.
It's just straight shots and linear kicks down the middle. Like, they're always going to be there. Anytime you angle off and he throws that 1-2, like anytime Gastelum throws a shot, his left hand, he overextends. And his hands drop and his chin goes up. Like, if you just step off to the side, you can crack him with a straight left hand on the counter. And I have seen some people raise the point that Gastelum could trouble Adesanya with pressure, which is kind of interesting. But again, I think that comes back to the footwork you talked about. Like, we did see Anderson Silva give Adesanya momentary trouble by pressuring him, but that was a lot of feints and a lot of lateral footwork to keep himself between Adesanya and the open space at the center of the cage. Like, Anderson Silva knows how to pressure when he wants to do it. And like, Gastelum's most notable pressuring performance was against Uriah Hall. And how's Uriah Hall's evasive footwork? How's his ability to deal with consistent pressure like that? You know, like it just feels like Adesanya on a very, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this is a misreading it, because sometimes it happens where I'm like, on a very technical, nitty-gritty level, one of these guys is just way better. And maybe that doesn't matter, but I don't know. Adesanya has a little bit of what we praised Holloway for before. Like, he is himself extremely relaxed and capable of thinking and adjusting on the fly. Even more so than Holloway, he couples that with insane creativity. Like, Israel Adesanya is like, put Max Holloway's brain in Kevin Holland's body. You know, like the same bizarre shot selection. Like, Adesanya just comes up with ways to hurt people on the fly. It seems to have fun doing it. And I don't know. I do feel like by the end of this fight, Gastelum's not going to be having much fun, and Adesanya will have had a good bit. So, I really strongly.
I will say you always have to consider the risk of an MMA fight breaking out, and in these kind of situations, that MMA is just such a super weird sport.
Yes.
That crazy. I don't want to necessarily say puncher's chance type thing, but crazy things happen all the time, and they get kind of elided by the general narrative of a fight. Like, weird scrambles just break out, and Gastelum's big chance in this fight for me is not necessarily the punching power, but the fact that when in scramble situations, he is lightning fucking fast at taking the back and choking people out.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely elite at that. And if they somehow get into some clinch situation, or Adesanya throws a ill-advised spinning kick and ends up giving his back, Gastelum will take him out immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen good signs from Adesanya with the grappling, similar to the signs we saw early on from Robert Whittaker in his growth, where he'd be on the ground. Like, I remember his Uriah Hall fight, and like, he spent much of the third round on the ground, and I was like, oh shit, like, he almost armbarred Uriah Hall. He was demonstrating genuine grappling skill, and we have seen a lot more of that from Adesanya. Like, for example, when he was on top of Brad Tavares, he looked very comfortable on the ground, very positionally savvy. But yeah, the speed of Gastelum comes through not just in the hands, but on the ground in the scrambles. He's always been a really excellent finisher as a result of that. If he hurts you, or you just end up in a compromised position for any reason, and Adesanya's wild creativity, there's a greater than slim chance that he could end up falling down or giving up his back, and that Gastelum could take advantage of that. But really, like, the basic dynamic of the matchup is Gastelum has to get to Adesanya, and Adesanya is good in general, but very specifically in the ways that Gastelum has struggled with, good at being hard to get to. So I have to favor Israel Adesanya pretty strongly here, which makes me a little nervous, but I can't really imagine picking Kelvin Gastelum from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, he might be, and the problem is that he has to kind of rely on a weird scramble happening, because Gastelum is not a great MMA wrestler, and Adesanya has passed the test of fighting a very good MMA wrestler in Derek Brunson, and again showed everything you would want to see, like fighting hands, disengaging, moving away from the shots, intercepting takedowns. Great. And yeah, Derek Brunson is a very good MMA takedown artist, and so far Kelvin Gastelum is not.
So, Israel Adesanya, 5 rounds. It should be interesting. I'm very interested to see it. And Gastelum is always dangerous, a great athlete. So, like, I want to see how this matches up. But both of us favoring the style bender, and that means it's time for another break. When we come back, as promised, we are going to get into the other scintillating fights from this undercard. Ovan St. Preux is fighting Nikita Krylov. That is absurd. That is the main card opener. Jalen Turner is fighting Matt Frivola. That is almost guaranteed to be a good time. If you remember Matt Frivola's last fight against Lando Venata, it was awesome. It was everything you could want. And Jalen Turner is part of this new crop of gigantic lightweight power punchers. And then Curtis Millender, Bilal Muhammad, which we'll get to that when we get to it. But they're okay after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil, I think we'll do these things in reverse chronological order, which means our last fight will be Curtis Millender versus Bilal Muhammad. But I have a point to make about that fight before we get into anything else. All right, and it has to do with Kevin Holland. Okay,
as all important things do.
Right. So I just want you to understand why it has to come at the top of this segment. It's going to be really, really weird, and I'm spoiling what'll be my pick here. But it's going to be really, really weird that Kevin Holland will have beaten Jeff Neal, but lost to Curtis Millender. Whereas Bilal Muhammad will have been badly beaten by Jeff Neal, but will almost certainly beat Curtis Millender. That is very strange. And I just want that, to be, at the back of your mind as we're approaching that fight and planning to discuss it.
Yep.
Should we talk about the other one first, though? Light heavyweights, Ovince St. Preux and Nikita Krylov. What is happening in this one? Just Nikita Krylov existing just makes me laugh still. He's such a goof.
Wait, it's a rematch.
I know it's a rematch.
I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking it was two incredibly weird dudes.
No, he got Von Prude.
Yeah, no, I kind of just hope that happens again, just because.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing?
See him going down, he's just holding onto a guillotine from side control. Everyone in the arena is just screaming at him, "What are you doing?"
Everyone in the entire arena doing the Macaulay Culkin face. Yeah. I really hope that happens. What will happen, though? Any feelings on this extremely light heavyweight matchup?
Ovince St. Preux is not a great wrestler, but he's a fine wrestler. Like, he's an alright wrestler for light heavyweight. And he's really nasty from top position, and he's big and athletic. And Nikita Krylov is undersized and noodly on bottom. And so, I just don't trust him to survive on bottom with OSB.
I still don't feel like I fully understand Nikita Krylov's grappling game. Maybe it's truly just that light heavyweight grappling is really bad.
I mean, his regional stuff before he ever came to the UFC was all just head and arm throws, right?
Look, I just want you to. This is a highlight of some of the submissions he got before he was in the UFC. He had 2 Achilles locks. He got an Achilles lock on Anatoly Didenko and Valery Sherbakov. He got an Americana on Dennis Simkin. Several Kimuras. All very strength-based submissions that you can just picture. You don't have to see those fights. You can picture the man he's submitting, who someone grabs his foot and starts twisting it, and he has no idea what to do and just taps immediately. Yep. And that's the thing is Krylov's grappling has worked at the UFC level, if that even means anything. But it's he's aggressive and he's willing to go for a wide variety of submissions. But positionally, he is and always has been bad on the ground. He is not a good positional grappler. And Ovince St. Preux is not bad in that regard and is very, very strong. And yeah, not fun to be underneath. So, I mean, there's nothing to suggest, especially after that Jan Blachowicz fight of Krylov's, that this won't go in more or less the same fashion as their first fight. But boy, I'm since you said it, I'm so desperately hoping it goes in exactly the same fashion. I want to see Krylov get St. Preux again, please. Von Preux,
I will say one thing is that Krylov is at least hyper aggressive. And he throws lots of hands and lots of kicks, and OSP is notoriously low pace and defensively lackluster. So, I mean, I wouldn't be super surprised to see OSP get just overwhelmed, and Krylov hits pretty hard despite the fact that he's clearly not physically particularly powerful in like grappling situations. He still hits hard, and like I said, he has a really high pace for a light heavyweight. But yeah, I wouldn't be hugely surprised to see him. But OSP is also an okay counter striker and hits pretty hard himself, and OSP is still crazy tough. Yeah, he's had that one knockout loss to Jimmy Manuwa, and other than that, he's never been stopped in his career, and he's fought a lot of pretty hard hitting guys. I mean, he's never been knocked out. Maybe he has really early in his career by Virgil Zwicker. Oh, yes. Wow. But yeah, so he's bigger, he's better on the ground, he's a better wrestler. He's probably tougher.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it comes down to the top position for me, honestly, like Krylov. You have to understand, as the world's premier Krylov hater, how relieved I was to see Jan Blachowicz just tie him up in a pretzel on the floor, because I have been screaming into the wind for what feels like years now. He's not that good on the ground. How does he keep submitting people? How did he submit a fucking black belt in Francois Marbohos? What is happening? But I think the combination of experience-based grappling ability and being really big and powerful that OSP brings to the table is probably just too much for Krylov to solve. So, yeah, that's fine. Lightweights. This one, the featured prelim on the ESPN prelims. Jalen Turner, who is, yes, Phil, an actual lightweight at 6'3" and bigger and wider than James Vick. He's fighting Matt Frevola. And this one sounds like a fire matchup. Pretty simple dynamic as far as I understand it. Matt Frevola, crazy aggressive against Marco Polo Reyes, which got him knocked out in a minute. And Jalen Turner is pretty decent striker, at least in single layers, and pretty goddamn powerful. So that strikes me as something that could very well happen here. But we did see Frevola's brand of maniacal pressure develop significantly by the time he had his fight with Lando Venata. It was not just a sort of bruising, come forward, eat one to give two kind of performance. He was slipping shots. He was countering. He was throwing intelligent combinations of punches. It was actually like, I was like, oh, okay, this guy looks like a well-schooled striker. And maybe he just, finally got to that level or really took it seriously, and it started to come out in that matchup. And with lots and lots of pressure. And so it kind of feels like a fight where either Frevola is going to get smoked or Turner is going to have a hard time with him as it goes on. Especially being that big, I have to imagine Turner has some kind of stamina issues.
Yeah. So I think there's probably a big issue for Frevola here, which is that Venata is not a big lightweight. Mm-hmm. And Venata's consistently had to just explode forward to strike. So Venata did have a lot of success in pushing Frevola up against the cage, but when Venata was throwing at him, Frevola was able to just counter with combinations in the pocket, and Venata is, traditionally defensively kind of horrendous. Yeah. So when he got stuck in those kind of situations, he sort of started to give up a bit. But I don't really see much of that from Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner likes to just poke at people with his lead hand from across the octagon and then crack them as they return. Yeah. I think Frevola is just going to struggle a lot more with the reach disadvantage in this fight. He did a lot. I mean, even against Venata, he did a lot of kind of punching at air as Venata backed out. He tends to plant his feet and throw back. He doesn't tend to leap forward. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, I think there may be an issue, and it was the fact that he took a while to get his aggression going. He's almost certainly going to get backed into the fence relatively soon, and he's going to have to survive Jalen Turner picking him off. If he can survive that, if he can draw Jalen Turner into exchanges, he could make this like a really fun fight, which would look even better due to the kind of physical disparity between it. It will look, it will just look like a kind of David versus Goliath type thing.
And it was definitely the pressure of Vicente Luque, in addition to the huge experience gap and so on and so forth. But it was definitely the pressure of Luque that gave Turner real problems really quickly. Even as he was landing in that matchup, he was like just being forced to come up with a lot more answers than a young and inexperienced fighter is comfortable coming up with.
Yeah, he's definitely someone that, it must be absolute hell for him to make lightweight. So he's clearly someone that really likes having that reach advantage.
Mm-hmm. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I think Frevola is going to be in very bad trouble in round one if he doesn't get finished.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably just a strong chance that he just gets finished in round one, frankly. But if he doesn't, it could be awesome.
That would be my pick. It's hard to get the image of him getting smoked immediately by Marco Polo Reyes out of my head. And I will say I just want to add a little bit to your point. Like we were talking before about Ray Longo strikers and how my opinion is sort of like circuited back around to being quite positive. Like I think when Chris Weidman, he was like the notable Ray Longo guy at first, and then we started to see the holes in his striking style appear, and I was like, I'm not so sure how great this Ray Longo guy really is. I think he consistently produces fighters who. Well, he consistently produces powerful hitters, that's for sure. I think he teaches good offensive mechanics. In the same way that Canelo Alvarez is not a naturally crushing puncher, but hits hard because he has really technically sound ways of throwing his punches. He just throws good punches. Ally Quinta, Chris Weidman, Matt Frevola, like all the Ray Longo dudes we're seeing now have that ability. But they do seem to also have that. They all seem to have a similar limitation where, like, Ally Quinta has been able to push through against some really passive fighters. But for example, anyone who sits back behind a jab, whether it's Khabib Nurmagomedov or Jorge Masvidal, is going to give Ally Quinta a lot of trouble. Which is maybe why Kevin Lee thought he could do that to Ally Quinta, but he's clearly not comfortable fighting that way. But basically, anyone who can just competently maintain distance is going to give those Longo guys difficulty, I think. So I think it is like a style-specific struggle where, yes, Turner struggles with the pressure, but is Frevola's style of pressure really well-suited to a fighter who is going to stay behind their lead hand and move laterally and just try to deny you a target while hitting you back? So it does feel like Jalen Turner, who I think is probably a right-handed southpaw, will probably be hitting Frevola with some really hard jabs and right hooks and hurting him early. So yeah, first round finish, Turner. Why the hell not? Curtis Millender, Bilal Muhammad, though, Phil. Quick thoughts on this one. It's kind of hard to. The reason I said before that I feel like Bilal Muhammad will win this is basically like the reason that his fight with Jeff Neal wasn't very close is he couldn't get any takedowns. And boy, did Melender's wrestling and grappling not come off with much shine in that short fight with Elias Zaleski dos Santos. The man does not grapple very well.
Yeah, so there's a few things to worry about from Muhammad's end, I think. And, primarily it's just the physical disparity, right?
Yeah.
He's a fairly undersized welterweight. I would take bets that he is smaller than Jalen Turner, for example, by some measure.
He's 5'10".
Yeah.
He's 5 inches shorter than lightweight Jalen Turner.
Yeah, and not like a visibly bricked up dude either.
No, his head is the only thing that he has that's bigger than Jalen Turner's.
Yeah, he's a guy who's been willing to take, relatively short notice fights and fight during Ramadan and such like because he has notoriously little problem in making welterweight. So he's pretty undersized, which is always going to be a problem when your main thing is like taking the other guy down. And Millender is, I think, even bigger than Jeff Neal. Is this correct? They're both they're both pretty huge.
Melender
dudes,
is
but
massive.
He is huge. So there's a strong chance that Melender is just
Curtis Melender, shorter than Jalen Turner.
Really?
He's 6'2". That's absurd.
All right, but he is a bricked up dude with it.
Yes.
And so there's a serious chance that like Muhammad just struggles to close the distance on Melender. That's been his main method of defense, is just to kind of poke people from range and be gigantic. I mean, Zaleski dos Santos hit him with an awesome takedown. He really managed to, he had to break his sense of distance a bit before he hit that takedown.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Melender disintegrated on the floor won't be an issue if Muhammad can't hit that first takedown. But other than that, yeah, it does seem like a clear way of getting to him. And Muhammad has been notable for just being relentless and for kind of picking pretty decent game plans for his opponents. It's rare that you look at one of his fights and you're like, you know what, you should have done X. Most of the time it's just been, when he's lost, it's just been, the main thing you just find yourself thinking is, you just can't physically compete with this person. Like Vicente Luque or Jeff Neal, or that he just has a clear technical edge, as in the case of Jeff Neal, he's just a better striker than him.
That's the thing with Neal. The difference between Neal and Melender, like I know I jokingly talked about how Kevin Holland seems to have lost and won to the wrong guys, respectively. But like Jeff Neal is a vastly different fighter now than he was then.
Yeah.
And the main thing has, like Dustin Poirier, the main thing has just been technical growth for him. And the thing about his fight with Muhammad is how disciplined it was. Like he outclassed Muhammad technically. And I think Melender does get by more on his physicality than on technique. I think there are problems with his footwork, the tendency to retreat in straight lines and lose his stance. He has developed a jab, which I really like to see, and he's a good counterpuncher with lots of power and good timing. But create more layers for him to deal with, and I think the technical issues start to arise pretty clearly. And I think the kind of pressure Muhammad tried to and eventually did find some success with against Jeff Neal is just going to be a lot more significant against a less technical striker in Curtis Melender. One who's just more susceptible to that pressure. It also has to be said, Bilal Muhammad didn't get to show many of them against Jeff Neal, but Melender wide open for Muhammad's beloved leg kicks. So I'm thinking lots of leg kicks and grindy takedown attempts from Bilal in this one if he fights the way I expect.
The Randy Brown game plan.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Well, I'm going to go with the sadness hedge.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. You know what I was thinking? Like, Bilal, remember the name Muhammad, is really genuinely one of my favorite welterweights.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, I'm going to go for the sadness hedge. I'm going to so I won't be too bummed out if Melender just physically overpowers him and jabs him up from range.
Or knocks him out. I mean, it could happen.
It definitely could happen. He's super tough, but he's been stopped.
He was KO'd one shot by Luque, and Melender is maybe not Luque, but a similarly powerful and precise puncher, I think.
Yep. So I'll be picking the sadness hedge.
Okay. Well, I understand. I also love Bilal Muhammad, but unlike some traitorous individuals, I still have faith in the fighters that I like. So I'm picking him to beat Melender. I think that's it for this episode before Phil has a chance to rejoin. Phil, do you have anything coming out this week in advance of UFC 236?
So I've got a couple of things. So firstly, I have that one that I mentioned last week, the sort of divisional health check. I've been working on that one, so it should be going up relatively soon. Hopefully it will be up by the time this episode comes out. I'm also working on a piece where I've been working through my feelings about the Poirier-Holloway fight, which, and how it's simultaneously awesome and a little depressing.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be called something like Good Belts, Good Violence, and Bad Belts.
Good Violence, Bad Belts. That's nice. Yeah, I thought about doing something similar, and then I was like, it makes me too sad to think about it from this perspective. So
It has been a struggle to write from that perspective, just because it does bum me out somewhat to write about it, and it's very hard to get into the right headspace to, like, either you should be excited or you should be either excited or you should be like enraged about a fight. And when you feel your main feeling is powerful ambivalence, it's actually quite a struggle to like to like translate that into words.
It's like trying to portray boredom in a movie without the scene being boring, you know? Like yeah, it is a struggle. Yeah, so as for me, like, I think I will probably just write a piece this week about Max Holloway's striking technique, because it's very good. So yeah, look forward to that. And make sure to check out, I think I may have mentioned it earlier on the episode, but if not, check out our, or rather my solo 1FC breakdown. I just talked about the 2 fights of the UFC transplants who moved over to 1FC, those being Demetrius Johnson and Eddie Alvarez. If you weren't aware, Eddie Alvarez got knocked out in the first round, or rather had his eye blown up in the first round and could not continue, TKO. And Demetrius Johnson had, some difficulty, but put on a very impressive Demetrius Johnson-esque performance. And I spent a little time talking about the 2 of those, since we did not find or make the time on last week's show to cover that non-UFC event. Oh shit, Phil, my check from Dana White just arrived.
Hell yes.
I'm going to edit out that 1FC talk, but thank you all so much for listening. Find us on Twitter if you have any comments, questions, concerns, if you're excited, if you're ambivalent, if you're depressed. Find us, whatever thoughts or feelings you want to share. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush. That's spelled B-U-S-C-H. Find those pieces we mentioned on bloodyelbow.com. And yeah, check out that latest bonus episode on our Patreon. Hopefully there will be a lot more good stuff coming this week, or this month rather. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Had a little frog developing there at the end.
Well, you can always edit it out.